Hello, everyone. In the last episode, we used ancient Rome and ancient Greece as examples to illustrate that in any society under peaceful conditions, wealth distribution will gradually become increasingly unequal. This led me to a question. Why was it Rome that conquered Greece, and not Greece that conquered Rome? After all, when the Romans were still farming on 7 small hills, the Greeks had already expanded their colonies to Sicily and even Marseille, spreading across the Mediterranean pond like frogs. 3 explanations for a Roman conquest of Greece. There are many possible explanations for this question. According to Russell Kirk, the Greeks were clever but lacked wisdom. They spent their days arguing in the public square, becoming top-tier debaters. Furthermore, Kirk argued that Greek religion was also inadequate, failing to provide community members with a basic moral consensus that transcended the material world. In Kirk's own words, Greek mythology neither encouraged human longing for eternity nor clearly proclaimed the rules that humans ought to obey. In contrast, the greatest characteristic of the Roman character was piety. With everyone revering the gods, it was easier to achieve ideological unity. Another very important difference between Greece and Rome lies in their attitudes towards citizenship. For a considerable period, Athens required not only both parents to be Athenian citizens, but also that the child be a legitimate, marital child to qualify for citizenship. In other words, Athenian citizenship was a process of continuous exclusion and purification. Rome, on the other hand, was always willing to grant citizenship to the elites of various ethnic groups within the Republic. Roman citizenship was a process of continuous inclusion and recognition. Inevitably, one plate got smaller and smaller, while the other got bigger and bigger. Of course, simply handing out green cards everywhere isn't enough. It must be supported by a stable legal system. Rome formulated the written Roman law to govern Roman citizens and the written law of nations, Jus Gentium, to govern non-Roman citizens within Roman territory. Regardless of whether the legal provisions were reasonable or equal, at least their output was stable and predictable. Athenian law, however, was a joke. Cases were judged by juries drawn by lots, using a head count vote. Where was the standard in that? Therefore, Athenians couldn't even govern themselves well, let alone govern others. All right, we now have 2 explanations for why the Romans conquered the Greeks, and not vice versa. First, the Greeks were too frivolous. 86 out of 100 were argumentative, making ideological unity impossible. Second, citizenship in Greek city-states was a process of constant exclusion. Children born to citizens and female slaves, or children born out of wedlock to Athenian women, were not granted citizenship, let alone foreigners coming to do business. Rome, however, was the opposite. After conquering others, they would actively accept local elites as Roman citizens. I think this is indeed a very important reason. Scheidel, using the perspective of inequality, provides us with a third explanation, which is truly enlightening to me. In the last episode, we mentioned that the exploitation rate of the Roman aristocracy against the commoners reached 77%, while in Athens it was only 49%. That is to say, inequality in Athens was far lower than in Rome. Could this be a crucial factor determining victory? Let's analyze this with a hypothetical scenario. Suppose there are 2 villages, both with the same population of 100 farming households, and each has an aristocrat. Let's call them Bob and Mike. The exploitation rate in Bob's village is 77%, meaning out of 100 buns, Bob can take away 77. The exploitation rate in Mike's village is 49%, meaning out of 100 loaves of bread, Mike can only take away 49. So, if the 2 villages go to war, who will win? You might think Mike's village will win, because Mike only took 49 out of 100 loaves, and the 100 farmers ate 51 loaves. Each person eating more than half a loaf is strong. Moreover, Mike's village is more egalitarian, so everyone cherishes it and is willing to fight for the village. However, a lower exploitation rate precisely indicates that Mike has less control over the villagers of Mike's village, and his war mobilization capability is lower. Bob's ability to raise the exploitation rate to 77% also precisely demonstrates the high degree of dependence of Bob's villagers on Bob. Let's take last episode's example. Why could I get 10 rabbits a day with Bear 1, and he had to accept just 3 rabbit tails from me because he's already a 200-pound fatty and can't run anymore. If he was only fat from 120 pounds to 130 pounds, I wouldn't be able to exploit him to this extent, right? Therefore, it must be the village with a higher degree of inequality that will win in battle. The more egalitarian a society is, the worse its war mobilization capability. Take Athens, for example. Its level of inequality was already low. After the defeat in the Peloponnesian War, the wealthy were severely damaged, and wealth inequality was further weakened. Its war mobilization capability was also further weakened 80 years later. Facing the threat of Philip of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, Athens was devoid of men of valor, falling into a state of numbness and apathy. To mobilize people to join the war, Demosthenes, the greatest orator of ancient Greece, cried out, "Men of Athens, you once took up arms against the Persians, against the Spartans. You personally participated in battles, faced dangers, for the sake of others gaining rights. But now, you are about to lose your own property and freedom, yet you still sit idly by." However, even this great orator failed, and no one listened to him at all. This is a third explanation for why the Romans conquered the Greeks, and not vice versa. If we directly understand the inequality index as a social resource mobilization index, we can understand many things. For example, why agricultural societies could easily defeat hunter-gatherer societies. In addition to high population density, high levels of inequality within the community and strong mobilization capabilities are also important reasons for the victory of traditional agricultural societies. The logic of imperial expansion. Okay, now we know that political entities with a higher degree of wealth inequality have a competitive advantage. So, how should such countries develop next? First, it must be expansion. The reason for expansion is also easy to understand. The process of Rome conquering Greece and other ethnic groups around the Mediterranean is like high P/E ratio companies today merging with low P/E ratio companies. It's the strong conquering the weak. The only difference is that the former has strong social mobilization capabilities, while the latter has strong financing capabilities. But the internal logic is the same. All empires, all large companies, must maintain continuous expansion, just like sharks need to keep swimming to survive. Because the exploitation rate of the empire against the lower classes has reached its limit. Only by swallowing a new cake with a lower degree of inequality and rapidly raising the degree of inequality of the new cake to the limit can a large amount of surplus be obtained in a short period of time, thereby alleviating the overstretched social contradictions. What if there's no more cake to eat? That is, when expansion is no longer possible. Just like when Rome looked around and found there were no more places worth conquering. During the Roman Republic, a small neighboring country voted to submit to Rome and become a Roman province. Rome said, "Thank you, but no thanks." Why? Because the cost of ruling it was higher than the tax revenue that could be obtained from it. It wasn't cost-effective. For Rome, when there was nothing more to eat outside, internal turmoil would occur within the ruling class to achieve wealth redistribution. But this was just infighting among the carnivores, and had nothing to do with the common people. Because as Scheidel said, in pre-modern societies, wealth came from political power, and the lower classes had always been at the limit of exploitation. Their living conditions were already unbearably miserable, so they became a constant. In other words, if there is war, then the carnivores are all well, and everyone gets rich together. But if there is no war, then internal purges and civil strife will occur within the carnivore class. The first civil strife in Rome, also the most dramatic one, occurred in 83 BC. Sulla posted a list, listing the names of senators and wealthy people who oppose him, and marked bounties after each name. 300 senators and 105 wealthy individuals were brutally murdered, their families exiled, and their property confiscated. The enormous wealth of the senators was redistributed in this way. In short, it's either war and expansion or internal strife. So, how is the problem of internal strife among the ruling class solved in pre-modern societies? Finally, let's look at an example. The Ottoman Empire explored a path with a relatively high level of intelligence. The Ottoman emperors drew on the experience of the Egyptian Mamluk dynasty, which was to send people to Armenia and the Balkans every year to capture the poorest Christian children. brainwash them by their side, convert them to Islam, and form absolute loyalty to the emperor personally. The Unsullied in the American drama Game of Thrones are based on this. After these Unsullied grew up, the emperor would make them high officials and generals. By letting the most humble people hold political power, a middle class formed by nobles and official families would not form. These Unsullied were also greedy and corrupt, but their official positions were not hereditary, and their origins were too humble. Once they died, their property was immediately confiscated, so accumulating wealth was meaningless. While in power, they just ate and drank their fill. That's about it. Okay, in this episode, we discuss why political entities with a high degree of inequality in pre-modern countries have a competitive advantage, continuously conquering regions with lower degrees of inequality, thereby making inequality in human society contagious and spreadable. And when expansion is not possible, the state, this professional violence machine, will experience political turmoil accompanied by the redistribution of huge amounts of wealth. In the next episode, we will introduce the four horsemen that can temporarily reverse the process of inequality: war, revolution, plague, and state collapse.